Welcome to our latest Wandering Walks of Wonder adventure tour. Today we're headed up to northern Michigan for a tour of Fort Michilimackinac. Constructed in the 18th century, Fort Michilimackinac originally served as a French fort and trading post at the Straits of Mackinac. Later, it came under British control. We'll learn quite a bit more about the history of the fort as we go along the tour. Situated at the northern tip of the lower peninsula of what is now the state of Michigan, the fort was built around 1715 and eventually abandoned in 1783. Positioned along the straits that connect Lake Huron and Lake Michigan within the Great Lakes region of North America, this site played a crucial role in the historical trade routes. The present-day village of Mackinac City has evolved around the fort's location, and the site itself has been honored as a National Historic Landmark. Today, it's preserved as an open-air historical museum and features several reconstructed wooden buildings as well as a fantastic palisade. Today, it's an integral part of Fort Michilimackinac State Park. On the shores where the Great Lakes, Michigan, and Huron converge, Frenchman Constant Le Marchand de Lignier erected this wooden fort in 1715. The fort was named Michilimackinac after the Native American designation for the area. Its meaning is somewhat debated, with the Great Turtle being a commonly accepted interpretation, likely alluding to the distinct shape of Mackinac Island. Another theory proposed by Andrew J. Blackbeard of the Odawa tribe suggests that Michilimackinac refers to an ancient tribe that once inhabited this land. The fort's establishment marked the culmination of a French expedition which, after abandoning numerous natives and traders, sought to reclaim this region, including the present-day site of Detroit, Michigan. The primary objective of the expedition was to quell the discontent among the Fox Indians in the north. Following the completion of the mission, a portion of the expedition returned to Quebec, while another remained to garrison the newly constructed Fort Michilimackinac. Positioned on the grounds of a former Jesuit mission, the fort played a pivotal role in safeguarding and promoting trade in New France. At the time of its construction, Fort Michilimackinac spanned an impressive 380 feet by 360 feet. Enclosed within its walls were various structures, including a parade ground, a commanding officer's house, an Indian council house, traders' houses, a guardhouse, and much more. The fort's strategic location and diverse facilities underscored its significance as a hub for trade and a key defensive outpost in the region. Over the years, Fort Michilimackinac witnessed the leadership of numerous commanding officers. Each was confronted with a recurring challenge. The fort consistently fell into a state of disrepair and demanded extensive renovations. The constant maintenance requirement stemmed from the fort's wooden construction, coupled with budget constraints imposed by the operator's nation, often resulting in neglect of the fort. By 1778, the fort had expanded to encompass over 100 buildings. However, due to the high operational cost and perceived vulnerability, British senior captain Patrick Sinclair made the decision to dismantle the fort and relocated it piece by piece to nearby Mackinac Island. The relocation process spanned over 2 years, involving the transportation of materials over ice during winter and by ships in the spring and summer. Upon completing the move, the old Fort Michilimackinac was stripped of valuable items and intentionally burned. It was faded into obscurity until it was rediscovered in 1959 during a professional archaeological excavation. And as we take a look here in this museum that talks a little bit more about the archaeology of the building, we see that since 1959, ongoing excavations have unearthed new discoveries each year. It's estimated that only about 60% of the fort has now been revealed through the archaeological processes. Despite its unceremonious retirement, Fort Michilimackinac served a vital role during its over 60 years of service. It functioned as a crucial refueling and resupply station, a prominent trading hub, and a significant military center in the region. Its historical importance persists as archaeologists continue to delve into its secrets and constantly provide valuable insights into the past. We'll take a look at some of the items that have been found during the various archaeological digs. In fact, this state park and this fort itself has been one of the longest ongoing archaeological projects, not only in the state of Michigan, but in the United States as well.
The well provided the inhabitants with a reliable source of water within the protected walls of the fort. By 1760, the well was abandoned and filled in. The site remained undisturbed for more than 200 years until it was excavated during the summer of 1961. This well protected to the present use.
Fort Michilimackinac played a pivotal role as the premier refueling and resupplying station, serving as a crucial link in the French Western trading system that connected itself with New France. While not primarily a military fort, its strategic position made it a key component in spreading French influence from Montreal to Lake Winnipeg and beyond. The fort, which was established again around 1715, became integral to handling the influx of fur traders and ships on the Great Lakes. It also functioned as a forwarding base for trading to distant destinations in the western country. The fur trade, once outlawed by the French in the early 17th century at the Jesuits' request, was later legalized again in 1715. The fort became a hub for the fur trade, managing the flow of fur inventory and traders. Its location on the Straits of Mackinac allowed it to flourish as a local trading hub, boosting revenue and fostering a thriving village within its walls. The French, aware of the vulnerability of the fort to attacks, used trading goods and gifts to build alliances with local tribes. This gained both trust and crucial allies against other European competitors. The fur trade in the region relied on peaceful relations, a challenging prospect given the complex dynamics among individual tribes and the inevitable conflicts. European involvement further complicated matters, with tribes strategically playing nations against each other to secure favorable trade deals. Despite the Europeans' perception of native tribes as easily manipulated, the tribes demonstrated resourcefulness and cunning in their interactions with both the French and British rulers of Fort Michilimackinac. The fort's prime location facilitated the movement of furs from Native American trappers to hubs where larger canoes transported them to trading posts. Fort Michilimackinac emerged as a major hub at a critical choke point between New France and the western lands, handling and controlling the majority of trade from the western area. The traded products were then sent either down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico or over to Quebec and Montreal in Canada. By 1742, the financial needs of New France prompted a change in the fur trade system. Leases for the trading hubs were offered to the highest bidder, with the successful bidder obligated to pay the French yearly and keeping the remaining profits. While this initiative initially failed after the lease of the first fort, Fort l'Abbaye, subsequent revamping and a system of favors by the governor of New France proved very successful, and it provided the necessary funds to sustain the trading system. After the conclusion of the French and Indian War, Fort Michilimackinac came under British control. Despite the change in ownership, the area had already established itself as a crucial and profitable trading location. The French trading system, particularly the use of voyageurs, remained intact, and the fort was reported to handle a significant portion of the continent's trade. The Peace of Paris, which occurred in 1763, marked the end of the war and left the industry largely unaffected for both the French and Indians in the region. French traders' goods continued to be treated with the same respect as those of British citizens, allowing the major industry to persist without hindrance. Major General Thomas Gage, tasked with evaluating the trade operations at Fort Michilimackinac, identified two main criticisms of the French fur trade system. He disapproved of the sale of total monopolies and permits, as well as the extension of trade to local native villages. Gage believed that monopolies increased costs for the natives and restricted trade, while permits were vulnerable to abuse, especially as trade extended to villages beyond government oversight. Gage proposed solutions including the removal of monopolies, elimination of trade restrictions, and limiting Western trade to 5 posts to control traders in Indian villages. The Crown could still benefit financially, though, through importation taxing of furs, a system that was already in place in the eastern colonies. Despite initial challenges in the transfer of power and policy to the British, the fur trade at Fort Michilimackinac experienced a revival and thrived under British rule. News of the opening of new British territory attracted numerous new traders to the area, including individuals from the southern colonies as well as Great Britain. During this period, English trade agents discovered old French currency, held it until the French king redeemed them, and then profited with over $3 million in today's money. Following this financial venture, the British resumed fur trading, but with notable differences from the French era. While the French generally respected the natives in their lands, the British, driven very much by greed, sought not only to trade but also gain native lands. Natives, anticipating the return of the French, added an element of danger to the already precarious trade environment, as the British had to contend with the hostility now of unfriendly natives. In the first decade of British rule, wars and skirmishes with natives subsided, but dissatisfaction still lingered among the Native Americans, Native Indians. They were unhappy about having to travel to the fort for trade and the frequent revocation of their credit. Despite their discontent, the natives were unable to halt trade as it had become an integral part of their way of life, and it created a complex dynamic in the region. While Fort Michilimackinac was primarily a trading post, it did hold some military importance, especially during periods of conflict. The fort played a role in resupplying troops and served as a meeting place for war parties. Until 1756, it saw limited action in various native wars, but it was during the French and Indian War that the fort became a focal point for war efforts against the British. When the French surrendered at Montreal, Fort Michilimackinac was handed over to the British as part of the treaty. Despite the change in ownership, the treaty allowed French inhabitants to retain their land and traders could continue their activities. On June 2nd, 1763, during a rebellion called Pontiac's Rebellion, the fort experienced its only direct military action. The local Ottawa and Chippewa tribes, in a cunning move, invited British soldiers to watch a game that was very similar to lacrosse. This game occurred outside the fort's walls, and it was ostensibly held to celebrate the British King's birthday. However, this was a ruse, and the Chippewa revealed hidden weapons during the game that led to a massacre where 22 people were killed or captured. The fort remained under Indian control for a year until the rebellion subsided and the British regained control. The fort continued to be under British control until its deconstruction in 1781. In 1781, the fort was relocated to Mackinac Island, as mentioned earlier, and for many years it remained hidden and buried until excavation efforts began in 1959, revealing this lost fort of the Straits. We'll continue along with our tour of Fort Michilimackinac. Most of the rest of the tour will be going through several buildings that will look at what homes and offices and warehouses, as well as weapons, look like during the period of time, the over 60 plus years that this fort was in operation. Keep in mind, it not only was a military fort, although it didn't see a lot of military action, it was more of a trading post. So many of the items that we'll see as we go along the tour will be related to the fur trading industry as well as trade between the Native Americans and the French as well as the British while the fort was occupied during the period of time between 1715 and 1781. These next buildings that we see here represent what some of the traders' homes would have looked like during the time that the fort was in operation. Inside, we'll be able to see some of the tools of the trade, as well as what the living conditions look like for the families who lived here on the fort. This next building that we go into talks a little bit about what some of the firearms weapons that were used during the time that the fort was in operation, as well as what an armory would have looked like during that time. It's a fascinating display of how weapons have advanced in today's world compared to what they were like over 200 and some odd years ago.
Oh, it smells like Alexander's house. Drew. Bro. Oh my gosh. Bro, this cabin is so nice. Drew, it smells like Alexander's house.
We entered through the fort through what was known as the Water Gate, which was the side that faces the Straits of Mackinac. Here on this side of the fort, we see the Land Gate, and just outside the walls, we see what a Native American encampment would have looked like during the period of time that the fort was in operation. Basically, there were two gates, one on each side, as well as several guardhouses that lined the palisades to keep an eye out on any troubles that may have occurred. I hope you've enjoyed this Wandering Walks tour here at Fort Michilimackinac in the upper area of Michigan. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you on our next Wandering Walks of Wonder adventure. Take care now. Bye bye.